Oh, the boss is here.
Right. Look at that guy. Yeah. No, Gondor is the king.
It's not the White City?
No, the White City is Minas Tirith. And then, of course, when you get really into neighboring, which Minas Tirith are we talking about? Don't get me started.
I'm telling you, I'm hearing this.
So Gondor was one of the realms in exile. The new all northern world.
Don't worry, you're not the only one who's new to all this stuff.
I'm not the only one, what?
You're not the only one who's new to all this stuff.
So the elves made a Minas Tirith in the first age, yeah. So Minas Tirith is kind of based on.
It's a discussion panel.
Yeah, no, I mean, like,
That's true.
Tolkien did that a lot.
Yeah, it wasn't until we were writing.
No.
Yeah, sorry, we're doing book club this summer. I have my notes app open because I plan on asking you a bunch of real stinkers.
Fantastic. Let's do this. Let's do this.
Have you seen his Wire? He did two things with Wire, didn't you?
Yeah, well, three because they three because they recorded one of them and they were like, that was good. We're gonna need to make that 2 videos. So the Twitter Q&A I did, they broke into 2 parts.
Oh, okay.
But they were the 2 different Wired videos. Yeah. I have to admit that the doing those Wired videos, I think, might be one of the first times in my life I ever actually earned the respect of my son, who was like 12 at the time. And when I had a video on YouTube that hit 1 million views, I think I finally gained the respect of my son. That was a day to remember. He's like, Dad, your video went to 1 million views. And I was like, that is just a glimpse of how cool your father is. Tried to write it while I had it, you know.
Is that rumble from the mic?
What's that?
Is that rumbling from the mic, or is it
No,
outside?
maybe from live stream. It's a problem with air walls that say block out everything. More air than walls. More machines than listening.
Literally, it's from downstairs, so we can feel it. It's the bass coming from that.
It is performance.
So, I mean, we're right above the
Right, that would be so.
So just some little organizational things before we officially begin. So there are 2 mics up here. So no, there's not. There's a mic and what looks like a mic, but is actually a webcam. So I suggest you don't talk into the back of the camera, but instead talk into the microphone. So 1 microphone. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be reading and talking a little bit about 2 of my favorite Tolkien passages. And I want to also have the opportunity to hear from you guys about some of your favorite Tolkien passages and why you love them, and then we can kind of talk about those a little bit. We may have time for some general Q&A and to answer very difficult Silmarillion questions, but
Easy.
hey,
I have it, I don't have it ready.
but anyway, in any case, we can talk afterwards too for that. But what I wanted you guys to have in mind is that there are 2 options. You can, if you choose, come up to the microphone and talk that way, so that everybody in the room and people, because there are people watching online too, of course, who can hear that. But there is another option, which is if you're on the Discord app, you can go to the Live 2 room on the Discord app, and you can just type your questions there. I'll be monitoring that during the session as well. So if you don't want to come up to the microphone, that's totally okay. You can just type your question or tell me a passage in the Discord app, and I should be able to see that too, and we can talk about that. Of course, one of the difficulties with reading sessions like this is that one can only read so very few passages in an hour. So there will be so many passages I would like to read at length that I'm sure I'm going to want to read passages that you guys talk about or ask about that we may not have, but at least we can sort of talk about them together a bit. We'll do what we can in an hour. Okay. But it is still 2 minutes before I'm supposed to start. And I, as somebody who is fairly consistent in my punctuality, I think it's fair to say, in its lack generally, but consistent. Consistency is the thing. I do arrive exactly when I mean to. I have been making profit off that line for years and years and years. There may be no line I am more grateful to Peter Jackson for including in the screenplay than that line. But anyway, I hate to start early because somebody shows up on time and feels like they're late. That's the sad thing to do to somebody.
Because of course they arrive precisely
when they want to, exactly. Quick survey question. So, raise your hand if you have read The Lord of the Rings. Okay. Raise your hand if you have read The Silmarillion. Okay. No shame if you haven't. It's just not, raise your hand if you've read Unfinished Tales. Okay. Raise your hand if you've read The History of Middle-earth. Okay.
I read The Hobbit.
The Hobbit. Raise your hand if you read The Hobbit. Yes. So I shouldn't take The Hobbit for granted. That's The Hobbit was where I began, and I'm sure there are many who began with The Hobbit. One of the turning points of my career was the day I was handed The Hobbit by my cousin when I was technically first cousin once removed, but it's complicated. When I was 8. I was 8 years old and I was given a copy of The Hobbit for Christmas because I had just the summer before read the Chronicles of Narnia with my family and loved them. I was huge, and remain a huge Lewis fan. And my cousin said, I hear you like the Chronicles of Narnia, then you'll probably like this too. And he handed me The Hobbit. I still have the edition of The Hobbit that I was handed when I was 8, paperback, Ballantine edition. It's a special one. It's the purple emu edition. Anybody who knows the old Hobbit editions, there was a set of the Ballantine American editions, whose covers were designed by an artist who was given like a week, and any artist in the room will understand commissions like this, right? She was given a week to do a set of covers for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Whoa.
She did not have time to read the books, so she was just like, fantasy, strange creatures. So she drew this like weird landscape. It's like very 70s stylistically. Weird landscape with like bulbous trees that look like they had red light bulbs hanging off them, and there was like a purple emu in the foreground of the Hobbit one, and the Lord of the Rings cover had this like really freaky looking bright red lion in the front, and afterwards, true story, the artist read the books, and she was so mortified by the covers that she had made, she actually sent in the mail an envelope with an olive branch in it to Tolkien, apologizing for the covers that she had made. She was like, I am so sorry.
Yeah, nothing to apologize for. Those covers slack.
The purple emu Hobbit is pretty awesome. I have to say. Nothing to do with the book.
It turned out great, but she didn't understand the assignment.
No, exactly.
Task failed successfully.
Right. Yes. Whereas this cover, of course, that I have on screen is one of the designs, of course, that Tolkien himself drew. Anyway, okay. Let us begin. So first of all, happy Gondorian New Year, everybody! Today is the day which is frequently called Tolkien Reading Day. That's a Tolkien Society of the UK tradition that they have popularized to call March 25th Tolkien Reading Day. I often get asked, like, what are you doing to celebrate Tolkien Reading Day? And I'm like, to me, that's almost like being asked, so it's National Breathing Day. What are you going to do? Reading and talking about Tolkien it's not a special occasion for me. But today, since as soon as I was thinking through my panels and I was looking like, I'm like, holy cow, it's the 25th of March on the Saturday when I'm going to be doing panels. So today we're gonna read, and I wanna talk about some of the things that I just love and have always loved about reading Tolkien. So it's gonna be a sort of an annotated reading. I've chosen 2 passages of the thousands I could have chosen. I've chosen 2 passages which I really love and which sort of encapsulate some of the things, both that I love, but also about things that have really kind of challenged me. These aren't necessarily the passages I loved most when I was a kid, like that I was first drawn to with Tolkien. These are some of the passages that have really sort of changed me over the course of my life instead. So it's a different kind of relationship that I have with these passages. Okay, and as I say, feel free to, if there are passages that are really meaningful for you, you can go ahead and enter those in the Discord, and we can go through some of those. All right, I want to begin with the March of the Ents. Then with a crash came a great ringing shout, Harumra! The trees quivered and bent as if a gust had struck them. There was another pause, and then a marching music began like solemn drums, and above the rolling beats and booms were wailed voices, singing high and strong. We come with roll of drum, tarun, darun, darun, darum. And if you've ever rolled an R in your life, you have to do it when reading these lines. The Ents were coming. Ever nearer and louder rose their song. We come with horn and drum, taru, naru, narum. Bregalad picked up the hobbits and strode from his house. Before long, they saw the marching line approaching. The Ents were swinging along with great strides down the slope towards them. Treebeard was at their head, and some 50 followers were behind him, 2 abreast, keeping step with their feet and beating time with their hands upon their flanks. As they drew near, the flash and flicker of their eyes could be seen. Here we come with a boom, here we come at last, cried Treebeard when he caught sight of Bregalad and the hobbits. Come, join the moot, we are off to Isengard. To Isengard, the Ents cried in many voices. To Isengard! To Isengard, though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone, though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone. We go to war to hew the stone and break the door, for bowl and bough are burning now, the furnace roars, we go to war. To land of gloom with tramp of doom, with roll of drum, we come to Isengard, with doom we come, with doom we come, with doom we come. So they sang as they marched southwards. Bregalad, his eyes shining, swung into line beside Treebeard. The old Ent now took the hobbits back and set them on his shoulders again, and so they rode proudly at the head of the singing company with beating hearts and heads held high. There are a lot of things that I love about this passage. One is the poetry. Now, for those of you who have listened to my podcast or watched my broadcasts at all, know that I love Tolkien's poetry. This is not a love that I was born with. I used to skip the poems just like everybody else when I was younger. Paying attention to the poems is something that came much later, and it was poems like this one that really turned the corner for me. And one of the things that is so prominent, it's prominent in very many of Tolkien's poems, but is particularly prominent in this poem, and that is the beat. It's many people say, when I'll be talking about Tolkien's poetry, and I'll be like, okay, so what's the rhythm of this line? And people are like, I can't hear it. And I'm like, yeah, you can. You just need to practice. Sometimes it's harder than others. Admittedly, there are some poems where the rhythm is less clear. Nobody can miss the rhythm of this poem, right? Tolkien is wonderful at not only writing good meter, but writing good meter that hits, all you have to do is just read it aloud. If you're just looking at it on the page, silently, it probably won't jump out at you, right? But if you give voice to it at all, you hear, this is not only, so this is an iambic poem, boom, 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 right? Very persistently through. But this is not just iambic. This is a marching song, right? And remember that he's described, the Ents are doing percussion as they come, right? They're doing body percussion. And body percussion is cool at almost any time, if you can do body percussion well, right? But if you're an Ent, right? If you have a wooden instrument for body percussion, I mean, come on, right? That's really cool. So 50 Ents doing body percussion as they're marching is going to have a really strong beat, right? And you can hear, and he represents that in his poetry. To Isengard, though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone, though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone. Almost nowhere in Tolkien's poetry does he do a more regular iambic beat than this. But it's not always as hard as this. For instance, sometimes he can do a really regular iambic beat and it can be really flowing and musical, as for instance in the poem of Nimrindale that Legolas sings. Very regular iambic beat, but very smooth and flowing. This is, all of the heartbeats are particularly harsh. And you see how he does that. Look at all the explosive consonants that he uses. Like all the B's and D's and K's and S's. All of the, like so, I can barely even say stone in the microphone without, making the microphone pop, right? Look at all the alliteration he uses. Though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone. Right? Both the bare as bone repetition of sound at the end, but also strong and stone in the middle of the line, right? Bringing it all together. Echoed again with the stone in the next line. We go to war. Linking the repeated W of we with war, right? Like he's using the sounds of his letters to link the idea of the Ents with the idea of war, right, that they're going to hew the stone and break the door, picking up on those B's from the last line. For bowl and bow are burning now. This is their cause, right? And my favorite line, the second to last line, to land of gloom with tramp of doom. Oh man, the way that he does the internal rhyme and the assonance there, between land and tramp, right, with that same vowel sound there, and gloom and doom. So you've got the L's from land of gloom, which is really fun, and then tramp of doom. Oh man, so good. So good. Like both the variation, the fun variation of the consonants with the consistency of the vowels. Oh, so good. So good. There are very few, people sometimes ask me, so do you think Tolkien was a good poet? And I'm like, I have no idea how to answer that question. It depends on what you're looking for, right? One thing that I will say is that Tolkien was a very humble poet. Humble in the sense of he was very willing to write bad poetry when the story calls for bad poetry, right? So, and this is the thing, whenever, if I want to say, I think Tolkien was an excellent poet, somebody will be like, well, what about like the, Goblin Town poem from the, that's not a very good poem. And I'm like, it is a very good poem. It's a very good goblin poem, right? That's just the poem that the goblins would say, right? And he's not trying to compose a 20th century classic every time he writes a poem. His poetry is serving his story. But one of the skills that Tolkien was just top-notch on, Tolkien has an amazing ear, just an amazing ear. And it has to do with his language studies. Tolkien had a phenomenal mind and ear for languages. And what to use the very, very fancy academic phrase, his phonoaesthetic sense, that is his sense of the sound of things and how the sound of words affects your perception of the meaning and stuff, so good. And his oral play, I think that a huge reason why people skip the poems is just mostly because they don't read them aloud. If there's one Tolkien reading lesson you should take from this session, always read the poetry aloud. It does things to your ear. It's not designed, really ever, to be just read off the page. Sadly, Tolkien himself was not a wonderful reader. There are many of his readings that are recorded, and of course it's wonderful hearing poetry Tolkien poetry read by Tolkien. But he's not like a wonderful performer. He would have been the first one to say that. He had kind of a small, nervous voice that was hard to understand. People in his lectures at Oxford often had a hard time understanding him. Though when he reads Quenya, holy cow, so fast. He reads Quenya like a speed reader. It's unbelievable. You hear him recite Galadriel's Quenya poem from the Fellowship of the Ring, and it's incredibly fast. Anyway, so read Tolkien's poetry a lot. So this is one of the things, because this poem, the sound effects, so to speak, of this poem are so prominent and so strong. This is one of the first poems that I read aloud and was like, whoa, okay, I see what he's doing there. So it was really one of the beginnings for me of coming to appreciate Tolkien's poetry better. But not just to focus in here on the literary, mode, his poetics and stuff within this passage. This moment of the March of the Ents, this moment when the Ents finish their 3-day moot and they decide that they're going to march on Isengard and go to war. One of the ways in which this passage always affected me, which I didn't understand originally, was that this is Tolkien accomplishing what he called myth. He meant something different from myth, from the way we usually use the word myth. Modern Americans, when they say, most of the time you hear somebody say, that's a myth, what they mean is, that's something that some people believe, but it's not true. Right? That's the definition of myth. A thing people believe that isn't true. That's a category of things, I suppose. But that is an enormous cheapening. That gives you no glimpse of what Tolkien meant when he talked about myth. And he would have said, like if you read especially Tolkien's early work, The Silmarillion is a work of myth-making. That's what he would have said he was doing earlier on. Not in The Lord of the Rings exactly. But in the 1930s, if you asked Tolkien what he was doing, what kind of writer he considered, he would say, I'm a myth maker. I write myth. I'm interested in myth. He was always, one of his kind of teaching pet peeves on this subject was that he noticed that a lot of people in the modern world talk about mythology, like traditional mythologies, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology, as if it just kind of happens, right? As if these are stories that are. And nobody asks who wrote those stories. Nobody appreciates that the stories, mythological stories, are themselves work of art, and a very particular kind of work of art. What is being captured through myth? What is happening in myth? It's not just an untrue story, right? As he himself said when talking about that, he's like, that casts rather too wide a net, right? He's not saying much when you're just saying, it's a myth, that means it's not true. Well, okay. No, he says, myth is much more than that. Indeed, he went on to say that myth was something which is actually the important thing about myth is that it is true. Not historical, necessarily. It's not to say that the stories that it tells are an account of events that actually occurred somewhere. That's not the kind of truth that myth is interested in. Myth is interested in trying to capture ideas, to try to talk about things that you can't talk about, to try to capture things that you can't just point to convey truth that you can't just say or explain or diagram. But you can try to get at it in myth. And of course, one of the things that Tolkien does, Tolkien talks about, so a lot of, when I'm, let me cite my sources here. When I'm talking about what Tolkien says about myth and how he talks about things like fairy tales and fantasy and stuff like that, the number one source which you can read if you're interested is Tolkien's essay on fairy stories. You can find this in a couple different places. It's in some collections with Leaf by Niggle. You might find it in I think it's in the Tales from the Perilous Realm. I'm not sure if they included that in all editions. You can find it in there's an edition of On the Fairy Stories, a scholarly edition published by Roman Flieger and Doug Anderson. It's out there in a lot of places, a lot of collections of Tolkien's essays. You can easily find it online. On the Fairy Stories, it's called. And anyway, one of the things that he talks about in On Fairy Stories is when he talks about the benefits of fantasy. What's the point of fantasy? What good is it? It is this essay is the it's like the ground level for the defense of fantasy, for the explanation of fantasy. Tolkien's talking about fairy stories, fairy tales in particular, but he's very interested in fantasy, and it's applicable, and he applies it to some extent to fantasy in general. But one of the functions of fantasy is to take a part of the mundane world that we're all familiar with and transform it. And the way that Tolkien transforms trees and forests through his depiction of the Ents is enormously powerful and has been very impactful to me. Man, I remember I was living in Delaware, in Dover, and we used to come up here to Lancaster all the time when we lived in Dover, and there was a tree in our backyard which was unwisely planted by the people who had built the house. It was one of those things where they planted the tree not really realizing how big it was going to get and everything, and it was planted really close to the house, and it was looming over the house, and I'm like, this is not okay. We can't, my wife was really nervous about it and everything. So finally I'm like, we're going to have to cut down the tree. And I'm telling you, I felt like I was ordering the execution. I'm like, what would Treebeard say? It's the way in which Tolkien's fantasy, the fantasy of the Ents, breathes this new life into the world around you, invites you to see things. Because I read The Lord of the Rings, I have been helped to see the trees around my house as living creatures, not just as landscape, not just as decorations or something like that, right? But as actual living creatures like me, living their own lives there in the world. And boy, executing that tree was painful. We planted something else there, but still, that was a hard day. And the way in which this moment in which the Ents come to life, because there's a sense in which when you meet the Ents, they're so quiet and funny and slow moving and slow talking. They're just standing there staring at Merry and Pippin and not really saying much. And now they move forward into action, and we see not only their decision but their passion. Right, for bold and bow are burning now. The furnace roars, we go to war. Right, and they're the furnace of their own rage, right, of their own outrage, is only echoing and reflecting back the roar of the furnaces that are burning the trees of Fangorn and Isengard. Anyway, and then the final image of Merry and Pippin. riding proudly at the head of a singing company with beating hearts and heads held high. As I said, this wasn't one of my favorite passages at the very beginning of reading Tolkien, but many years later, I have felt myself with Merry and Pippin there, feeling myself elevated and borne up on this tide of something greater, deeper than I understood, now coming to life and sweeping forth, given a voice of its own for the first time, and feeling oneself in comradeship with that, as Merry and Pippin do, as Treebeard takes them and puts them on his shoulders. So wonderful in so many ways. This next passage, for which I have less time to talk, is both longer and more complicated, so I'm barely even going to try to really annotate this one. This is the very end of The Return of the King. Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth, and the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost. And the ship went out into the high sea, and passed on into the west, until at last on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass, and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. But to Sam, the evening deepened to darkness as he stood at the haven, and he looked at the grey sea. And as he looked at the grey sea, he saw only a shadow on the waters that was soon lost in the west. There still he stood, far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth, and the sound of them sank deep into his heart. Beside him stood Merry and Pippin, and they were silent. At last the three companions turned away, and never again looking back, they rode slowly homewards, and they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire, but each had great comfort in his friends on the long grey road. At last they rode over the downs, and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland, and already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill, as day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was yellow light, and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in, and set him in his chair, and put little Eleanor on his lap. He drew a deep breath. "Well, I'm back," he said.
You stole mine. I just sent that to you right now.
You just sent that to me? Yeah. Well, we can talk about it.
So great.
There we go. It's so great. It's so great. There is so much here. Like I said, when I was a kid, when I was first reading The Lord of the Rings, when I was like 9 and 10, I loved all the exciting, I loved Helm's Deep, I loved the Battle of Pelennor Field, still love the Battle of Pelennor Field, still love Helm's Deep, loved the fight with the Balrog, I loved all the action moments, those were my favorite parts. Loved Sam and Shelob, that was what I was all about when I was 9 and 10. This passage, I was a little bit moved by it, but I didn't really understand it. Not sure I still even now understand it, but just a few elements I would draw attention to. First of all, we have the sound of the waves. So I was going to actually cut out the passage describing the far green country under a swift sunrise, but I decided to leave it in because that's cool too. Though it's really Sam and Pippin and Merry's response to it that I wanted to focus on. Frodo's departure into the west. Of course, I said before that the wizard never being late is one of the lines in the screenplay I'm gladdest that Peter Jackson put in. One of my top 10 lines that I don't like what Peter Jackson's inclusion of was this one, or rather his displacement of it. You may remember when this line, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and you behold white shores and beyond the far green country under a swift sunrise. You may remember where that's quoted in the film, right? In the film, it's Gandalf talking to Pippin when Pippin thinks they're going to die in the siege of Minas Tirith. And Gandalf is describing to him what happens to you after death. Gandalf is lying to Pippin about what happens after death. This is not what happens after death. This is, in some ways, almost the opposite of what happens after death. This is what happens when you don't die and you go into the undying lands in the West. That's what's being described. Frodo is wounded and he cannot be healed. His body is wounded and cannot be healed. His spirit is wounded and cannot be healed in Middle-earth. And he is not going into the hereafter that mortals go to when they die. He is going into the West, to the undying lands, where there he can find healing and then die. He will still die. He will not become immortal. We know it does not work that way. It is not the undying lands that make those who live within it. It's called the undying lands, not because it makes you immortal when you go there, but because the people who live there don't die. Like it's them who give the name to the land, not the land that gives them immortality, as the elves tried to explain to the Númenóreans in the Silmarillion. Frodo will still die, but he will find rest and healing and peace before he dies. That is why he and Bilbo both go off into the West as a final reward for their sacrifice and for what they endured. So, where do they go when they die? Gandalf could not reassure Pippin about that because he has no idea. Nobody knows what happens to mortals when they die. It is the great black box that the elves don't even attempt to answer because they have no access to that information. But anyway, Frodo is off and he's finding healing. And that, by the way, one of the reasons I included that, because that certainly was one of the things that I came to understand better. I would have told you how much I loved the excitement of the Lord of the Rings. I had a strong feel of like the epic stature. I was really, Aragorn was one of my heroes. I was very impressed by Aragorn. I was very impressed by Gandalf, and I still am. They're very impressive. But what I came to understand better as I grew older is that at the end of the day, The Lord of the Rings is really a story about loss. It's a story about, there's that funny line, remember, when Galadriel, introducing herself in Celeborn, says, right, and for many long years we have fought the long defeat. Everybody in Tolkien fights the long defeat. That's what life is, the long defeat. And that might seem depressing, but that's the amazing thing about Tolkien, is that I don't know any other writer who is both at the same time so real about pain and suffering, so in tune with loss and the inevitability of loss, and yet so firm in hope. It is a story of loss and it is a story of hope at the same time. And that has always been an amazing thing. Ever since I began to see that, I'm continually amazed at what Tolkien does with that. But now we come to Sam. Sam's standing for hours as it gets dark, staring out to sea where he can no longer see the ship. And that line, which when I finally noticed it, really haunted me. There still he stood far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth, and the sound of them sank deep into his heart. The sound of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth sinking deep into Sam's heart. What does that mean? What's it doing to Sam, exactly? On the one hand, this, I think, is Tolkien trying to demonstrate what he calls in other places the sea longing, right? Now, on the one hand, Sam has always had a longing. He's always had a longing for elves, sir, right? As he says many times when he's caught eavesdropping, right? It's so much fun in that speech that he gives. He says that, elves, sir, 3 times over the course of that speech. He's always loved the stories of elves. He's always been drawn to the stories of the elder days, the days that are past, the days which now you can only come into contact with in the West, across this sea, which laps the shores of Middle-earth, the sound of which is now sinking into his heart. But that suggests that now something deeper is happening to Sam. Sam is experiencing loss. He is losing Frodo. He is losing Frodo, his master and his best friend. He has been devoted to Frodo his entire life. And Bilbo, his teacher, also at the same time, going out in the same boat, right? All of his connection with that world that he has had before. And it's now all passing. Frodo and Bilbo themselves have passed away into the West, just like almost all of the elves whose stories Sam has loved over the course of his life, right? And the sound of the sea, the waves of the sea breaking on the shore is setting into his heart, and he eventually will listen to that sound, and he will go to the sea. Did you know that Tolkien originally wrote an epilogue to The Lord of the Rings? He cut it, which is probably just for the best. It's a little cutesy, but the epilogue is Sam with Eleanor when she's grown. It's old Sam talking to his kids, especially Eleanor, about the Red Book and everything. Sam reading from the Red Book to the kids and stuff. It's really cool. If you want to find it, it is in Volume 9 of the History of Middle-earth, Sauron Defeated. You can read the unpublished epilogue of The Lord of the Rings. And in that epilogue, Eleanor, when she's grown, knows. She knows. Remember at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, when Sam and his friends, in their conspiracy, right, they suspect that one fine day, Frodo is going to go off and follow Bilbo on some adventure or other, so they're keeping a sharp eye on him, right? In the epilogue, we find that Sam's kids are keeping a sharp eye on him because they're pretty sure he's going to sneak off and go to the Havens one of these days, right? She knows, Eleanor knows, that her dad has this sea longing. But Sam also achieves healing. This is not just loss for Sam. This is also healing for Sam. The conversation that he has with Frodo before this, when Frodo talks about leaving, Sam wants to come with him. Sam doesn't want to be parted from Frodo. But there's Rosie and the baby, right? And he says, I feel that torn in two, sir. Right? His desires are pulling him in two different ways. He belongs here in the Shire. He has work to do here in the Shire. He has a family that loves him here in the Shire. And he loves them, and he loves the Shire, and he wants to answer that calling. But he also wants to go with Frodo. He also is drawn into the West. But in this moment, in the very act of the sound of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth settling deeply into his heart, he also is at peace, and he returns home and is set in his chair, and little Eleanor is put in his lap, and he says, I'm back. He is whole now, and he can be Samwise the Shire, Samwise the mayor of the Shire, right? The great, humble leader of the Shire. Have you ever noticed, remember Sam's ring temptation? It's brief, right? The one when he has the ring in the Path of Curathungol after Frodo's taken, and he has his ring-induced monologue, right? Where he has that temptation to that he could wave his hand, he could claim the ring and wave his hand, and all of Gorgoroth would turn into a garden. Remember that? But he rejects it because of his plain hobbit sense, because he doesn't need a garden swollen to the size of a realm, right? Just a little private garden, right? And of course, in the end, what happens when he gets back to the Shire? What does he do? He goes around planting trees everywhere and sprinkling Galadriel's magic dust, right? And then planting the Malorn. And all of the Shire thrives and grows because of Sam's tending. He ends up with a garden the size of a realm. The whole Shire becomes Sam's garden, right? Through his love and his humility, not claiming it for his own, right? The whole Shire becomes a garden that he gives to all of the hobbits. So beautiful. Such an amazing payoff of that moment when you see it. But anyway, let's look at some other passages that you guys suggested. Adam suggested the one that I said. Okay. Others? Other suggestions? Other passages that you love? You can shout them out. I'll repeat them for the online people. You can come to the microphone if you like. Yeah. Okay.
I of course don't know the passage off the top of my head.
Oh, it's okay. No, you don't have to read it or know it necessarily. Just tell me what it is. We probably don't have too much time anyway. Just tell me what it is, and we'll talk about it.
I really like that part after Ungoliant devours the two trees.
Yeah.
When the Valar consign themselves to drink to the dregs the cup of misfortune that Melkor.
Oh yes, drink to the dregs the cup of woe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the cup of woe.
Yeah.
You know the passage. I was like, who in here has not drank to the dregs a cup of woe, right?
Oh yeah. Or to have that feeling that you have been drinking the cup of woe, but to fear that you have not yet drunk to the dregs the cup of woe. And it could get worse.
And
right?
it's the only thing left you have to do.
Yes. Yes. Oh, absolutely. It is. Really powerful. And when you think about that, we're talking about like the pantheon of gods here, right? Even the gods suffer loss, right? Even they, can't, suffer unrecoverable loss, right? The trees will never come again. Not until perhaps when Arda is remade. Yeah, that's such a good passage.
Yeah, I love the part immediately after where Yavanna is like, oh, make more trees? Sorry, that was a once per reality thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, Fëanor just bust the Silmarils open. And he's like, well, that was a once per reality arts and crafts project. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I also love how, Tolkien gets impatient like he does, right? And is like, who will deny Yavanna? Like, come on, Fëanor, break open the Silmarils. Yeah, you made shiny rocks. Come on, make what then we can all have the trees again. Like, this is a no-brainer. And Aulea's like, hang on, man. You don't get it, right? You don't get it. This might just look like some random arts and crafts project to you, right? But, Aule understands the work of the craftsman and how important that is. Yeah, it's a remarkable passage. Remarkable because it really is easy to understand. Fëanor, and I know if you haven't read the Silmarillion, you might not know Fëanor. And boy, are you missing out on a very special person. He is very metal, though he does not have the most metal moment in all of Silmarillion history.
Oh no, obviously.
Yeah. So the most metal moment, without question, in all of Tolkien's writings, is the first version of the death of Ecthelion when he kills Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs.
I was just about to say that.
Holy cow. Okay, so...
straight up Ragnarok.
Oh my goodness. So in the Book of Lost Tales version, in the published Silmarillion, it just says in one sentence, right? And then Ecthelion drowned, he and Gothmog were fighting, and they both drowned to death in the fountain. And it's like, well, that seems a little anticlimactic. Okay, here's the full version of the story. He's fighting Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, right? And during the fight, he's already lost one arm. So he's fighting one-armed against Gothmog. And then Gothmog cripples his other arm. So he's now fighting Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, with no arms. So what does he do? But he has a pointy hat. He has a helmet with a spike on it. So he rams Gothmog with a spike in his helmet, skewers him in the belly, bears him over backwards into the fountain, drags him down to the bottom, holds on to Gothmog with his legs and the spike of his helmet, and holds him under the water until they both drown. Come on. It is just like It is the most metal death scene I have ever heard of in any writing. It is so good. Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
So if we're talking about Silmarillion, the one passage that struck me, for example, it's a very simple sentence. It's the part where Fingolfin realizes that everything's ruined, and all his plans have come to an end, and his army is defeated and everything, and he goes on a suicide mission, and he goes straight to
Angband.
Where Morgoth is, and he bangs on the door. So imagine like someone banging on the doors of the most evil person ever and calls him Craven and the Lord of Slaves, and come out here and fight me right now, you son of a bee. And the line is just 3 words, and Morgoth came. And it just has so much weight to it. It's like imagine the devil getting off of his throne and actually coming down, and like I'm imagining like all his slaves and orcs and everything looking like, holy God, he's actually going to do. He's actually going to go out there and agreeing to actually like imagine you fighting the devil. And what I also love too is that there's a callback to it as well. There's a part in the Akalabeth where Ar-Pharazôn and his army comes to Barad-dûr and shows up, and all Sauron's army flees in terror at the sight of this huge Númenorian army coming, and just like Alexis says, and Sauron came.
Yes.
And I just love the callback of that, and I love the connotations of all that.
Absolutely. And he reverses it. Sauron comes and surrenders.
Yes.
yeah, exactly. So cool. Yeah, that line, and Morgoth came. Tolkien was really good, and he'll do this like really flowing section, not necessarily of long sentences, but of sentences that are just piling upon one another, and then he'll have a really short sentence. Like the description of the Witch King when it's swooping down on Theoden right before the fight with Éowyn, and he's describing the fell beast, and he ends it with, and it stank. I love that line. Yeah, go ahead.
For me, this is a little obscure, unfinished tale. It was the Mariner's Wife.
Yeah.
And I remember near the end, the climax was the current king of Númenor got a letter from, I believe, somewhere in Middle-earth.
From Gil-galad,
That alerted him to the presence of what they didn't know at the time, but it was Sauron, the first coming of the Shadow, and they believe an evil shadow returned. And of course, that sped up the king to desire to have his son become king of Númenor, but of course that didn't work out. And at the same time, looking back, maybe the current king, his father, just wanted to stave it off as long as possible, not have to deal with it, and essentially have his son deal with it. But of course, that didn't happen. It happened to Númenor.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, was this the first coming of the Shadow on Númenor? Like, was this the first king I recall that maybe who essentially didn't willingly give up his life?
Right. That actually comes a little bit later, but it is a step on the road for sure. Yeah. That letter from Gil-galad is really, really interesting. That story, so the story is called Eldarion and Arendis. It's in Unfinished Tales. It's the only full Númenorian story that Tolkien ever wrote. Like, he wrote, like, the Akalabeth is like the plot summary of like the fall of Númenor, basically. But Eldarion and Arendis, or the Mariner's Wife, is one of the only like short stories that took place in Númenor. That he told, where he developed Númenorian characters and kind of gave you a sense of what it was like in Númenor. It's a fascinating story about a really unhappy marriage, which is fascinating in itself, actually. But yeah, that moment, and that letter is so cool because that's the only, it's not dialogue, it's a letter, right? But that's the only thing that Tolkien ever wrote in Gil-galad's voice. It's the only time we like hear Gil-galad speak in all of that I can remember in all of Tolkien's writings. So when we get the letter from Gil-galad and he reads it out, it is a really powerful moment. It kind of turns everything in that story on its head at that point. It's a really cool thing.
Some final question: could you argue this was the true beginning of Númenor's long fall? I don't recall of any of it.
Yeah. So it's hard.
Question.
Yeah, it is. I don't know that it's the beginning in the sense of like from a cause and effect standpoint, like I'm saying like, if not for this decision, it wouldn't have fallen or something. I don't think you can say that exactly, but I do think that both even the relationship of Eldarion and Arendis itself, and especially what happens with their daughter, is designed to sort of illustrate or kind of stand to show this is the direction Numenor is going to go. This is where these are the kinds of problems that are beginning to arise in Numenor and that are eventually going to mature into the full-blown process. So they're not evil, right? You know, they're not enslaving anybody. They're not, you know, no human sacrifices are committed, right? Nobody decides it'd be a good idea to build a temple in Morgoth, but we can begin to see the unrest, the greed, the division, both the isolationism and the going to Middle-earth are both problematic in their different ways. And so seeing these issues, like the seeds of these problems, I think is one of the main things that we're seeing in that. It's not necessarily cause and effect directly, but I do think that we're seeing a kind of foretaste of it in that story.
Thank you.
I know we're running low on time, so we're okay? Okay.
Okay, so I have a couple of statements and a question.
Okay.
First of all, Varda rules. We love her. She's a queen, literally, and also the best of the Maiar.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you which one your favorite was, but it's clearly Varda. Second of all, Ungoliant is the most relatable of the Maiar. Anyone who argues is wrong.
Melian is?
No, Ungoliant.
Ungoliant is the most
relatable of the Maiar. I personally think that it's like, a lot of people say, you know, oh, okay, this is ambiguous, where did Ungoliant really come from? It's like, no, boys, she's an Einer who decided to come into, like, I don't know what to tell you, it's kind of just text.
Yeah.
But anyway, because I'm currently hungry and been considering devouring my right arm.
Sure. Who's not been there? Yeah.
Right? Third, why are the great heroes here? Like, you know, Frodo, who quite literally spent every drop of his power and resolve and failed only at the very last moment to be saved by Sam, which all men must do, and such is the doom of men. We are, you know, cursed to always require saving. That's because it's very important that everyone know, according to Tolkien, that this is as different from Christian beliefs as possible.
Well,
very definitely.
That a rational person could write.
Right, yeah, that a rational person could write, of course. That's a joke. Mans was very Catholic. So why are Frodo, who has, you know, done all of this, and Gimli, who has arguably done the greater task of, you know, tolerating, you know, he's the prince of princes, and he tolerates, you know, the bark-eating savagery of Aragorn and Legolas. Like, they're disgusting. And he somehow is like, oh yeah, okay, I'll hang out with these utter animals.
Gimli's real heroism consists of putting up with Legolas?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, am I in any way wrong?
I wouldn't call that take mainstream, but
again, not wrong. So why are these people, why are these great heroes consigned to the West? Because by all accounts, you know, the greater reward of men, you know, the literal birthright of Sam and Frodo, not Gimli, because, you know,
who knows?
Complicated ideas about, you know,
dwarves,
dwarves, and Judaism in general, because of, again, the aforementioned Catholicism.
Complicated.
Right. Not that dwarves don't. They're great. We love dwarves.
We love dwarves.
Anyway.
We can agree.
Why are these great heroes consigned to the West when their literal birthright is the far greater rewards promised by Eru Ilúvatar to those of descended men?
They're not denied them. They're not denied them. They will. What they're getting is a long-term vacation in the West. Their destiny is not the West. Frodo and Bilbo will die and will go wherever men go. Gimli will die and do whatever dwarves do when they die. The going into the West does not have the power to change their destinies. The elves, who probably We're not told that, they don't say it explicitly, but I'm guessing that they have the Valar's word on, like that this is Valar's understanding as well. Going into the West cannot change your fate. They don't have the power to change people's fate, like the fate that Iluvatar, the destiny Iluvatar lays upon them at the beginning. So yeah, no worries. They're just, Gimli chooses to retire to the West. That's his retirement spot, because he wants to see Galadriel again. Huh?
Yeah, like mood, dude. Who wouldn't?
I would give her the ring in Aeneas, sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah. Galadriel asked me for the ring, I'm like, okay, here. Yes, mommy. What?
So my favorite Vala is Tolkas, I have to say. Tolkas is the best.
This is the only acceptable answer.
He is my personal role model. I love Tolkas.
To not take up too much time, I would just like to state that my man's Calagon was in fact done dirty. Dragons rule, and they are Melkor's answer to the Eagles of Manwë, and they rule, and that's it. All right, thanks so much.
Unless they run into somebody with a flying shiny boat.
Okay, so again, incredibly metal, dragons rule.
Yeah. Are we going to get in trouble? We're okay?
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay.
I'll say quickly. So, quick follow-up. Just want to say that as a Jew and therefore a dwarf, I get it.
Yeah.
But no. So for passages, it's almost more like the lack of information that I'm saying. Pretty much anything tying into Tom Bombadil and the biblical connections that they have. Tom Bombadil is Tom Bombadil, correlating to I am that I am.
Love Tom Bombadil.
We have no information.
Yeah. The lack of information about Tom Bombadil is part of the fun, right? Tom Bombadil is a kind of joy, a kind of innocence that you just don't see anywhere. The House of Tom Bombadil is like a little glimpse of like how things could be.
Arda Unmarred?
Arda Unmarred. Yeah, it's like a little patch, tiny little patch of Arda Unmarred.
I had heard a theory that said that Tom was the physical manifestation of Heru's soul.
Right.
If you haven't thought on that.
Okay, so several things. So first of all, the whole, this is the second panel in a row when someone has asked the Tom Bombadil question with like 30 seconds left. Can I just say? Sorry. But it's okay.
That's my fault, I talked too much.
It's okay. No, Tom Bombadil, the connection between Tom Bombadil and God. Tolkien was really clear on this. He actually addressed that literally, like explicitly. He addressed that one, and I think he's quite right. Which might seem a strange thing to say, like that I approve of Tolkien's answer to a question, but Tolkien never answered a question. You know, like many authors, if you ask them a question, they will just sort of assert something like, "This is what I meant." Tolkien never did that. Whenever somebody asked Tolkien a question, what he did was he then would do a close reading of his own book. Someone would say, like, you know, what do you think this is? He's like, well, let's go see. So he goes and he looks and he quotes the text, and he's like, I think this is what this means, but there's evidence over here which suggests, like, he approached his book as a reader. And so he lays out a case explaining why the Tom Bombadil is God thing doesn't work. And he fundamentally is like, no, what when Goldberry says he is, which is the way, when Frodo says, who is Tom Bombadil? And she says, he is. He's like, that is not the same as I am that I am, right? When God gives his own name to Moses in the burning bush. What she goes on to explain, because she doesn't just say that. She says, he is. And she says, he is as you have seen him. And then later on, when Frodo asks the exact same question to Tom himself, he says, what? Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. So what Tolkien said in his own commentary on this in letters in which he was asked about this was, Goldberry and Tom are both talking about what it even means to ask or to answer the question, who are you? What is a name? How does one, what is identity? How can anybody answer the question? Tom Bombadil turns that immediately back on Frodo. He says, who are you? Alone, yourself, and nameless, right? If you take away your name, it's like, you know my name, Tom Bombadil, but that's not enough for you. You need something other than my name? Well, if I take away your name, who are you? How would you answer that question, right? So they're thinking about identity. Tom Bombadil is master, we're told. Goldberry says that. So what does that mean? Anyway, but yes, clearly his connection with music and singing, it's one of the ways in which I think we can see that sort of primal delight in Middle-earth, the primal bond to Middle-earth. When the Ainur came into Middle-earth, they were bound by their love for Middle-earth to it. And I think that we can see that very clearly. He's bound to this little patch of Middle-earth, right? This little circumscribed patch. But I think he's not the only one. I think we see others like him, though they don't sing so much and we don't get to hear them talk so much. People like Carathras, for example. People like Old Man Willow even. But there's a lot that we don't know about Tom Bombadil. I think we're good for time. If you would like to talk more, you can stay after for a little bit, or you can find me in the exhibit hall. I should be there still a little bit tomorrow, and also some a little bit later this afternoon as well. At the exhibit hall, I wanted to let you know, so if you are interested in studying more, of course, I run Signum University. We have a program called Space, which is Signum Portals to Adult Continuing Education. We run month-long courses for people who are interested in studying. It's like everything that's fun about school with none of the downsides, like no high cost, no time commitment, no stress, no pressure, no homework, just getting together with professors and other students and learning stuff that you love and want to learn. So you can study fantasy, we have anime classes, you can learn languages, you can learn Japanese, Korean, you can learn Old Norse, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Elvish languages. We're doing a series where you can read through the whole history of Middle-earth together. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. And if you come down to the booth, even if I'm not there, there's a sign on my little table there. If you scan the QR code, you can get a free month for yourself and a friend. So you can get a free course for you and a friend to try out our space program. So I recommend go down to the booth and scan that and give it a shot. Our space program is huge fun. Also, there's my book. I'm writing my book on exploring the Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to live to write another one. By my calculation, I'll be writing, so I'm writing the Exploring the Lord of the Rings in 6 volumes, one on each book of the Lord of the Rings. The book I'm writing now, volume 1, is on from the prologue through the flight to the Ford. And I'm writing about 3 of my chapters per chapter of the book. So, and the way we're doing it, this is through Signum University Press, and we are, you can subscribe, and you can get chapters, the chapters as they drop while I'm writing them over the course of the next few years. So anyway, just wanted to, there's a QR code on that one too on the table, which you can scan. So wanted to invite people for both of those things. Catch me outside if you have more questions, and thanks for coming, everybody.
Be sure to join us at 7 o'clock for the next panel, Welcome to Middle-earth, Adapting Tolkien Video Games with the Tolkien Professor, and that's going to be in Live 3, right next door.
That's right, yeah, I'll be looking at how Tolkien is adapted. I'll be illustrating with the Lord of the Rings online.
Now, Sheila, there's the woman with the black.
No, we will not.